بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على
In the
سيدنا
name of God, most merciful, most compassionate, may the peace and blessing of God be upon Prophet Muhammad. We were supposed to say good morning, but this session was delayed, so we will say good day. This session tackles a very important issue, a very much indeed needed issue, namely the civil society and public policy making in Kuwait. Kuwait is known for its democratic experience, and it has one of the most traditional institutions that worked in parliamentary work for a long time. In this session, we are happy to welcome colleagues from Kuwait, and I am personally delighted to be in this panel amongst people specialized in civil society from academic institutions, from private institutions, namely Dr. Yacoub Al-Kandari, Dr. Malak Al-Rasheed, and Dr. Shareefa Abdullah Al-Adwani. Also, Dr. Ibrahim Al-Hadban, who will present the paper of Mr. Kandari, because Mr. Kandari was not able to make it here. The first paper will be about the role of civil society organizations in public policy making in Kuwait. This paper was written by Dr. Yacoub Al-Kandari. He is a professor at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology in the University of Kuwait, editor-in-chief as well of Humanities and Social Sciences Annals, has a PhD in anthropology from the University of Ohio, USA. He has held numerous posts, including Dean of Social Sciences at the University of Kuwait and Director of Gulf and Arabian Peninsula Studies. He is also the editor. He was the editor-in-chief of Gulf and Arabian Peninsula Studies. On behalf of Mr. Kandari, Mr. Ibrahim Al-Hadbat will present this paper, associate professor at the University of Kuwait. 15 minutes to each panelist. In the name of God, most merciful, most compassionate, may the peace and blessings of God be upon Prophet Muhammad. I would have liked it that Dr. Yacoub himself presents his own paper, but due to unpredicted circumstances, I was asked to read the paper yesterday, and I made some modifications to the PowerPoint. I will be presenting his paper only, and I cannot answer your questions because I am not Yacoub himself. Of course, civil society and societal institutions are very important for us because they help us move from a traditional society to an institution-based society. Institutions are the ones, or societies are the ones that make decisions. It is not the sheikh or the tribe leader who makes the decisions. Leaders are not the ones entrusted with making decisions like in traditional societies. Therefore, there was a necessity to move to a modern state, a state underpinned by principles, several principles, whereby if a leader, if a minister departs from his position at a certain ministry or public office, the public functions should persist and persevere. Was the Kuwait successful in establishing an institutions-based state? The mere presence of institution is not sufficient to say that the state is based on institutions. The institution is only an instrument, and if it's not well applied, we cannot say that it is serving social bonds inside a society. So here the question is about the role of civil society organizations in Kuwait. This paper was written by Dr. Yacoub. I will be only reading it. So this paper aims at tackling the role of CSOs in Kuwait and how they contributed to making public social policies, also to tackle CSOs' developmental role. So did CSOs contribute to development? When His Highness delivered speeches, he spoke about the importance of development. So do CSO help in serving development or advancing development in Kuwait? I am repeating the objective of CSOs. So it is about contributing to general social policies and social development. It also tackles the role of CSOs in social cases in particular and public policies in general. Also, it tackles the main components of civil society in Kuwait and what are the challenges facing them. First, we should start by defining CSOs. What are CSOs? CSOs are a set of political, economic, social and cultural organizations or institutions working in different arenas independently from the state. They are not owned or affiliated to the state. These organizations work in parallel with the state to achieve several objectives. Some of those objectives are political, such as participating in decision making nationally, such as political parties. It has also objectives relating to representing laborers inside unions, defending those people's rights. It also has cultural aims, such as authors unions and arts foundations. So it does every organization does its job or work based on its own objective. Civil associations, labor unions, business companies, industrial and commerce chambers, human rights organizations, women rights organizations, sports club, consumer protection organizations, and other non-for-profit organizations all fall under the umbrella of CSOs. Let us now define development. Development is a process that aims at triggering civilizational change. It is a set of different efforts that are leveraged to maximize on resources and to avoid the waste of national resources. States that were able to optimize the use of their resources and funds are believed to have succeeded in the development process. Development requires several tools and instruments that allow for such optimization of resources use. And when we speak about development, we do not only mean material development, we do not only mean brick and wall or infrastructure, but we also mean human development. So this will lead to shifts in behaviors and shifts in social relationships. States that failed in transforming behaviors are believed to have failed in development. What they achieved is only like an apparent case of development, but in depth they did not respect the natural resources they are endowed with, and therefore they did not achieve a human development. Development is twofold. The first dimension has to do with behavior, and here CSOs need to strengthen a production oriented behavior to support the state. CSOs contribute to developing and building people's capabilities as an impact or a result of this contribution or relationship between CSOs and the state. Yes, CSOs are independent from the state, but they influence the state and they can impose sometimes their agendas. CSOs help the citizens and the people feel that they have the power to influence or to pressure decision makers, and this positive feeling will bring about more change because citizens will not feel powerless. They also lay the foundations or the climate for self-confidence and independence. For when we speak about funding, there are several indicators that should be fulfilled, and once fulfilled or met, we can speak or we can say that this state has achieved a development. These indicators are related to infrastructure, schools, equipment, etc. However, another dimension is about the methodology, and this is sometimes more important than funding or quantity. By tackling methodology, we are transforming people from being consumeristic people to being productive. So this methodology has to do with behavior, with prevailing relationship, and it is the dimension that will help us move forward. It tackles how relationships between citizens interplay in order to boost economy and stimulate growth and production in the economic sectors. What is the role of CSOs in general in development? CSOs are an important source of information, and here information is different than that provided by official by state authorities. The provision of such information to citizens will promote accountability, because accountability relies on the availability of information. When we are aware of the scale of failure, the scale of bribery, and the scale of corruption, we are able to hold officials accountable. CSOs also have the role to train the citizens to act as lobbyists before the state. They also have a cultural component in their role. They raise awareness about values of tolerance and human rights, and such awareness will help shape better societies, societies that are built on mutual respect among its citizens. Article 43 of the Kuwaiti Constitution stipulates the rights of association based on national principles and based on the context of the country. No one shall be forced to join a certain association or another. Such associations have several objectives, namely to develop the practice of a certain profession, provide social care to groups that are in need, defend professional rights, conduct technical and social studies to tackle social and societal issues, and also promote seminars and scientific forums to develop the community and the society. So CSOs have evolved in number and they reached 414 in Kuwait, departing from only 69 CSOs over 10 years. The number increased from 90 to over 105. Some of these CSOs are sometimes not declared or registered, and they are seeking such official registration. Some social issues are tackled by CSOs, of course, but what matters here is that CSOs take different forms. For example, they can be charities, cultural organizations, labor unions, professional syndicates, etc. And CSOs combine ideology and technicality. Sometimes they can be politicized. They can start as a technical association, but they are later politicized and they are polarized by a certain political group in the country. Their role is to complement that of the state. Some charitable associations take it upon themselves to distribute aids and humanitarian assistance on behalf or as a substitute to the state. Other CSOs help promote national unity. They inspire confidence and they make citizens believe that they can bring about a change. They also rely on the democratic process because a change should not be violent. There are soft channels to achieve a change, and CSOs try to promote such challenges. Also provide assistance to the different groups of society. There is a social role as well of these CSOs pertaining to a family. When we speak about women, for example, there are feminist organizations that were established and women joined such organizations. There are also organizations pertaining to childhood where they promote child-related programs. There are youth related associations to help the youth avert drug consumption and delinquency. There are also CSOs that help the elderly. Volunteering is very important as well. When we encourage the citizens and our own sons to volunteer and to bring a change to their society, the effect will this will have a snowball effect, and the numbers will increase progressively. Those wishing to take part in volunteering will their number will increase. So change should not be violent. Like I said, there are several channels for the youth to achieve a change. Interaction is very important. In Kuwait, we have a margin of democracy and freedom where people can speak of several issues with no fear. And like I said, CSOs should be almost fully independent from the state and from the people in power. They are not instructed by the people in power, and they are open to others. However, there are always challenges, namely the gap between objectives and the reality. Sometimes the objectives are over ambitious and therefore CSOs fail to achieve them. So this gap between reality and ambitions is hard to tackle. We see CSOs declaring or announcing their ambitious objectives, and after a lapse of time we see them failing at achieving them. Other challenges have to do with the activities themselves, and some challenges have to do with funding. Part of the funding can be sourced one way or another from the state, knowing that CSOs are independent from the state, and provided that such funding is unconditional and that the state will not interfere in the functions of the CSOs. Other challenges pertain to the management of this CSOs, a lack of good governance and inability to contribute positively to society. Misrepresentation of or underrepresentation of women, of course, is one of the challenges, and there are political and sometimes confessional affiliations. Sometimes certain groups, certain political parties manage to take some civil society organizations under their wing, and the organization's work becomes subordinated or submitted to the will of such political parties. CSOs in reality do not contribute significantly to development, and despite the fact that the numbers of volunteers are increasing, the entire culture of volunteering isn't changing much. Youth So there's a gap between the youth and the founders of CSOs, and there's an issue pertaining to the registration and declaration of the establishment of CSOs. In conclusion, CSOs should have a bigger role, and they should be afforded more capabilities. They should take part actively in societal issues, and they contribute to solutions. They should focus more on family issues, terrorism, organized crime, also adverse phenomena that are alien to the community or to the society. Also afford all facilitations to the state has to afford all required facilitations for the CSOs in order for the latter to work better.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim Al-Hadban, for respecting the time allotted to your paper. Thank you. As a quick comment, I've seen your presentation is in red, as if CSOs are associations at risk. Dr. Al-Hadban actually presented the paper of Dr. Yacoub Al-Kandari, the role of CSOs in public policy making in Kuwait, and the main factors of CSOs, the challenges that they face in Kuwait. Did the CSOs in Kuwait succeed? in facing these challenges. What is their role? He shed light on that. He also shed light on the legislative structure, the challenges facing by CSOs in Kuwait. Thank you again, Dr. Ibrahim Al-Hadban, for this paper. We will now move to our next speaker and next paper entitled, the paper is entitled The Role of Kuwaiti Civil Society Institutions in Making Public Policy to Advocate Women's Rights. The paper is presented by Dr. Malak Al-Rasheed, Associate Professor of Social Work at the College of Social Science, University of Kuwait. She has a PhD in the philosophy of social work from the University of Denver, USA in 2004. She was a member of the Supreme Council for Family Affairs from 2016 to 2019 and a member of the Steering Committee of the National Council for Culture, Arts and Literature 2016-2019. She is also the author of numerous studies on public policy, social work, and women. Dr. Al-Rasheed, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes, and we will give you an extra 1 minute, as we did to the previous speaker. Good afternoon. Of course, reading glasses really show how old we have become. Many of the slides that I had in my presentation were mentioned by Dr. Al-Kandari, and I will try really to move over certain presentations that were mentioned. Dr. Al-Hadban really gave an excellent presentation, especially that he is a professor of political sciences, and the paper was an anthropological paper. Thank you for your efforts. I will set up a timer because I think I will be discriminated against by the chair of this session. I advocate women's rights, the chair said. Of course, we will speak about the role of Kuwaiti CSOs in making public policy to advocate women's rights and the violence against women, the roadmap, what we will be discussing. I will start with a small introduction and then definition of civil society. Dr. Ibrahim also did that. I will talk about violence against women, figures, definition, certain facts that drove me to write this paper. Also, I will speak about the role of CSO in violence against women in Kuwait, the stages of decision making, how CSO partake in the phases of decision making. Of course, policy making is one of the major roles of any state. It is a role that requires consultation of effort. This is not only the role of the government. There should be the CSO should partake in decision making. The CSO should leave its footprint in public policy making in the country. CSOs, of course, society is included a main factor that drives policy making in the state. Of course, with the after the end of the 80s, we saw a rise in democracy. Not to talk about democracy, the non-governmental organizations should play a role in this democracy process. There was a promotion for the role of CSOs in order to complement the role of the state in democracy making and also to move away from the umbrella of the state and dependency of the state. The CSO has many definitions, but among these definitions, these are organizations, whether public or non-public organizations that are not part of the government apparatus. It is self-government organizations, the independent, free. Some of them are not-for-profit organizations. In addition, also its main functions is of course gathering interests, shedding light on certain issues, and this is something that I will talk about here. I will talk about violence against women's, improving lifestyle, raising awareness, establishing new leaders, because through volunteerism, perhaps in Kuwait, there is a great role for student unions, etc. We find that these associations and these CSOs and NGOs along the years really are establishing new leaderships that are playing a major role in decision making in Kuwait. spreading the culture of volunteering, like Dr. Ibrahim has mentioned, promoting discipline. One of the main role of civil society organization is to monitor the functions of the state. It is an apparatus in order to institute democracy via free work and democratic work and popular participation. It is also a link between the demands of marginalized groups and disenfranchised. And here we will also talk about violence against women and also bridging the gap in where the state does not play its role, the role it's supposed to play. Of course, what is violence against women? A background. Of course, the United Nations defines violence against women that any violent acts that leads to suffering on physical, sexual, mental suffering on the level of women. Whether this has taken in the publicly or privately. In 2013, WHO has analyzed of data of more than 80 countries. 1/3 of women around the world suffer from violence, especially violence from their partners. There are many figures in this respect. Regionally, there is a study published in Qatar by Dr. Al-Ghanem. In the study, Dr. Al-Ghanem mentioned this is, of course, included 2,700 students in the University of Qatar. The figure states, or result states, that 52% of the sample were subject to a form of violence, 20% to sexual harassment, 14% rape attempts, 40% were not allowed to give their opinions, 36% were spoken to with disrespect, also 8% were not 18% were not allowed 30% were allowed to move to get out of the house, 18% were subject to violence, 8% only who were subject to physical violence really reported this violence to the police. In Bahrain, the figures are the same. The official statistics of family violence in 2015 were 1,655 cases. 75% of violence were against women. Also in 2016, 859 cases. In the first half of 2016, i.e., there is an increase of violence against women in the UAE. The Dubai for women and childcare, had 1,433 cases in 2017. 508 were family violence. 99% of these cases were violence against women, and 23% of the victims were Emirati women. Actually, the spouse was the main perpetrator of violence, with amounting to 79%. With mistreatment of children we had 62%. Most of them female. Of course, female. 60% of these children were Emirati children. The size of the case of this issue in Kuwait, there are many figures in different studies. I did not want to mention them here because they are unofficial. The official statistics that I used is issued by the Ministry of Justice in 2010, which formed a kind of that shaked actually, or a shock in the Kuwaiti society. The yearly cases are 367 cases per year, i.e., if we divide it to 12 months, there is one case approximately, or one crime that is being reported daily. When I say there is one case that is being reported, multiplied by 10 two cases that are not being reported, so you can just only imagine the size of the problem. This table shows the cases, or between 2000 and 2010, the increase and decrease, of course, on cases. In general, there is an increase in the cases of violence against women. Facts. The first fact is that despite the fact that the Kuwait has signed the Convention Against Discrimination Against Women in 1979, but I believe that violence against women and girls is still a main problem and phenomenon all over the world, not whether developed countries or underdeveloped countries. Only 2 of between 3 countries have criminalized family violence. 73 countries still really relieve actually perpetrators of violence. And Kuwait is among the 73 countries and the 49 countries that do not have laws that protect women against household violence. The rapist sometimes really are exonerated. The study that we concentrate on is the relation between the state and the CSOs in the Kuwait, especially with regards to efforts to establish laws that protect women from violence or combat violence against women. What is the role of the aspired role of CSOs in Kuwait? We answered that with regards to shedding light on the role of CSOs in drafting new laws to combat violence against women. Of course, the political decision making and political policy making in general passes through a process made up of 5 phases. First, establishing the political agenda, and then drafting the laws or draft laws, then decision making, and then implementation, monitoring and evaluation and assessment of the implementation of the law. What I tried to do, I tried to link between these 5 stages and the role of the CSO, and I have used a model that was issued by AALEP in 2019 on how CSOs contribute in these different phases. These phases are as follows: advocacy. So advocacy, gathering information, raising awareness, consultation, innovation and service, monitoring and assessment. Of course, all these are the phases of decision making. I will mention what happened in the CSO sector in Kuwait, how the CSO sector in Kuwait really partook in these phases. With regards to advocacy, CSOs in Kuwait has really advocated advocated related to violence against women, what is needed in order to protect women against violence, and it also advocated to put this case as a priority in policy making in the state, partaking in the consultation that was called for by the state in order for the CSOs to have a voice in these meetings, lobbying and advocating in order for the members of parliament to vote for the drafting of laws that would combat violence against women. With regards to gathering information and raising awareness, the CSO has undertook studies and questionnaires and presented the reports to the state in order to shed light on the size of the problem and to raise awareness among the community and the public through seminars and lectures by UN agencies, and also organizing seminars on how to deal with violence from a legal aspect, and awareness also shed light on the gaps on the legislative service levels that help in entrenching this problem. With regards to expertise and consultation, draft laws for combating violence against women were presented by a number of CSOs, that including re-examination, re-evaluation of current laws, whether they respect the constitution, the religious environment, and the cultural environment. The analysis presented by CSOs helped in delineating the current and future needs by using scientific and empirical studies. Of course, the role or the upcoming phase is innovation and service. The specialized CSOs or campus CSOs organize trainings and workshops for supervisory and service institutions that would help in dealing with the issue of violence against women. It presented a number of draft laws that lead to criminalizing violence. For example, now we have a very clear campaign that is now underway in Kuwait that is called abolish 153. For those who do not know this article, it is Article 53 of the Kuwaiti Penal Code. It is honor killing. It decreases the sentence of the person. For example, if he finds his wife, his mother, his sister, he found them in a compromising position and he kills her. This to imprisonment only for 3 years or a very minimal fine instead of being subject to capital punishment. And this is, of course, a great imbalance in the Kuwaiti Penal Code. Also, this could be construed as encouraging this honor killing in the state. Monitoring and supervision to monitoring the efforts by the state. The CSO is now shedding light on the promises given by the government and monitoring what has been implemented, what has been achieved. For example, in 2017, in October 2017, a help center was for women was established, but this center is still not operating fully, and CSOs has lobbied, has shed light on the lagging behind by the state in opening the center and making operational and providing shadow reports published by CSOs in parallel to the national laws that are being presented to the United Nations, and a number and many members of NPOs have partook in the UN discussions and shed light on the gaps in the laws and in the official reports presented to the UN, and this requires, of course, continuous monitoring and examination. I will now move to the conclusion. The conclusion is as follows. As we've mentioned, based on the aforementioned, despite all the efforts of the CSOs in Kuwait until now, these efforts did not lead to issuing a violence against family violence. The efforts are still in its primary stages. We want to promote these efforts, these contributions. This is why the government, or actually the state, should promote an environment that empowers these efforts, freedom in the establishment of associations, independence of these CSOs without interference of the state, freedom of expression, communicating with international organizations, the right of advocacy and congregation, the right of receiving resources, be it from international organizations or even foreign states. Thank you very much. I've respected the time allotted to me, which is 15 minutes. Thank you.
I was afraid first that she wouldn't stick to time because she threatened me preventively. Thank you, Dr. Malak Al-Rasheed, for presenting your paper. You spoke about CSOs in Kuwait and their role in women rights issues in Kuwait. You spoke about definitions and violence against women. You gave us figures. I would have wished for you to give us figures about Oman and KSA, but for now we suffice ourselves with this. You spoke about the role of CSOs in decision making, especially to protect women from violence. In conclusion, she spoke about the necessity of finding a legislative mechanism and build an integrated structure to protect women from violence. We hope that women do not witness any violence in their life. The last paper will be delivered by Mrs. Shareefa Abdullah Al-Adwani about female role in public policy making in Kuwait. Dr. Shareefa is a professor at the College of Political Sciences and director of the Center of Gulf Studies at the American University of Kuwait. She has a PhD in political science from University of California, Davis in 2016. Her publications focus on policy making in Kuwait. Unfortunately, her paper will be in English and she will be speaking in English. Here we will be using the help of the two interpreters here. Mrs. Shareefa, the floor is yours.
So I already have had my introduction. My paper today is on female youths, or youths in general as well, and public policy making. So if we're going to start with my motivation, if we think about Gulf countries, we think about who makes decisions in Gulf countries. And those decisions, well, they tend to be made by those that are older and those that are male, right? Two big characteristics. So from there, when we think about these decision makers planning for the future, they have a lot to think about. They have environmental issues, they have employment issues, they have healthcare issues, and these issues are things that perhaps they haven't dealt with in their lives, right? We're much more well connected with ICT now, and the kinds of solutions we need to plan for requires a vast diversity of creativity. So what links these together? What will bring us to be able to plan for the future? And in my opinion, this is the inclusion of those that are female and the young as well when it comes to making policies. So if we're going to look at the structure of my presentation, I'm going to start with saying, why we can't ignore women and youth, and then talking about incorporating them into our public policy institutions. I then reveal some of the interview information that I have from my interviews with members of the Kuwait Youth Assembly. And then I'll talk about youth assembly implications. So from there, I guess I'll begin with talking about demography. Demography is very important when we think about why the youth and why women are very important for the policymaking process. For me, I define a youth as between the ages of 0 to 35. I have a number of reasons for this. Most of my data is from 2015, and so we have to go back a few years. And I'm also including kind of the next generation of youth. My upper bound, I put at 35 because that is the cutoff age for the Kuwait Youth Assembly. So that's how I've chosen to define youth. If we think about the percent of youth in our countries, the lowest one is still above 60%. So most of us, the majority of our countries is comprised of youth. And of course, 50% women. When we think about men and women, we're aware that as the generations have continued, our youth are some of the most educated generations in GCC history. Here we're looking at men and women, and as I go to the next slide, you're also looking at women, right? So some of the highly educated youth that's available for us. But what's weird is despite having a high level of education, finding a job can be quite difficult. In some fields, there's an oversupply of labor. In some areas, there's misemployment, there's lack of information regarding new markets and careers, and so what does the data tell us? Well, if I'm looking at employment, on average, if you are a GCC youth, you are 4.5 times more likely to be unemployed compared to your older counterparts. If you are a woman in the GCC, you are 8 times more likely to be unemployed compared to your GCC male youth counterparts. And if you are a woman and a youth, you are 5 times likelier to be unemployed compared to GCC male youths. And the employment example was this example to understand, what is going on in our countries and who is it affecting. So from this employment example, we have immediately the informational benefit of including the youth, of including women, right? And so this way we can understand the challenges that they face and perhaps receive information on it regarding solutions. So the question behind this paper is, how do we include youth and women in our policy making process? And my answer to that is youth assemblies. And I use the case of Kuwait to clarify. When it comes to youth assemblies, the definition, just a general definition, is that they're formal national institutions comprised of youth. They have several roles, and it's going to depend per country. They can provide information. They represent their constituencies' interests. They link the people with the government, and some suggest and create legislation. The selection can range from being elected to being appointed by those higher in the administration, and their institutional powers also range from an advisory or consultative role to one whereby they are able to propose legislation. Just this year, Kuwait put forward its first formalization of the institution of the Kuwait Youth Assembly. There had been informal iterations before. One of the big objectives, of course, if I'll remind you of my first slide, is right here. How do we include women and the youth? The candidate criteria, well, you have to be between the ages of 18 to 34. You have to at least have a high school degree and must be in good standing with the law. From there, our candidates submitted a letter of recommendation and a video file to the committee in the various ministries that you see there, the Ministry and the Youth Authority as well. And they were selected from these candidates using a lottery-style system, as long as they fit in with the criteria. We can talk more about what has happened with the Youth Assembly since then afterwards, if you'd like to know. When we think about, well, how does that look like in Kuwait? When there were selections were based on governorates. There are 6 governorates in Kuwait. All right. Each of the 6 would have 6 representatives, half male, half female. At least 2 people on the 36-person youth assembly would be persons with disabilities. We had alternates, and they also went through an entire summer's worth of training. The training was to help them start on their committees, and there were several committees in the Kuwait Youth Assembly. And you can see, if you look at the topics of all of these committees, I won't read them as you all can read, as you look at the topics, you know that these are the topics that are going to be hitting our youth now, later, and the next generation continuously. And so their discussions in committees, they'll start with the committees, then from there they can push legislation that has been passed in the committee to the Youth Assembly. If it succeeds at the Youth Assembly level, it will go to the Youth Public Authority, to relevant ministries, and may indeed face those in the National Assembly one day for debate, discussion, and perhaps approval. So in order to understand what was important and what's going on exactly when it comes to the Kuwait Youth Assembly, I interviewed a few people who were members of the Assembly. And so I wanted to present some of their voices here for you all to see and to hear. When they were asked about political participation before the establishment of this Youth Assembly, one of the members said, generally speaking, there wasn't a strong connection between the government and youth. So I then asked, well, why did you apply to the Kuwait Youth Assembly? Every single person that I interviewed said, to serve our country and for better youth-targeted policies. One went in depth, and she said, I had a lot of issues with employment. I know I wasn't the only one with these issues. Many hundreds of youth experienced the same or similar difficulties. We knew more about the issues than public policymakers in the National Assembly, as we experienced them firsthand. When asked about diversity, one member said, females are just as capable as males. It's powerful because now we have the same equal opportunity, which is rare. And of course, as you all know, when it comes to the literature, an increase in diversity is highly associated with an increase in positive, beneficial outcomes, and that includes financial outcomes. When asked about, not the Kuwait Youth Assembly, but the National Assembly, when asked, why aren't there enough women in the Kuwait National Assembly? A lot of them suggested that society's views are keeping women from running and succeeding in our National Assembly level. One person stated, "Women are mostly looked at as mothers rather than workers and entrepreneurs." Another said, "Even women today are still voting for male candidates rather than females, despite women's competency." When asked about solutions to this, well, how do we get more women into the National Assembly? You all know that in an interview, these young men and women only have 30 seconds to think of answers. I wanted to present their answers regarding solutions to this, just so that you all see how amazingly creative these youth are. We've had suggestions such as putting in a quota system in the National Assembly and with ministers, or perhaps, as well as or instead of, why don't we have more women leaders in critical national sectors like the oil sector? One person stated that we really need to start promoting based on merit and work and not just how long you've worked there. And one went down and said, I think we can take a larger picture, kind of look at this thing and say, why don't we start educating our students at very low middle school or even primary school level about political engagement? What does this imply for other GCC states? If we were thinking about perhaps having something like a youth assembly in all GCC states, saying that there are a lot of youth and a lot of women in other GCC states, there are three big implications that I learned that I'd like to share with you all. The first is that it's very helpful for this institution to be formalized, right? And so laws are written, buildings are built, practices are established, charters are written, because this will allow there to be growth and development throughout the years. The second implication is that these kinds of institutions should not only be representative of the people, but inclusive of various minorities that otherwise may not have the ability to speak for themselves. As I'd like to remind you, in the 36-member Kuwait Youth Assembly, there are 2 persons with disabilities. And finally, when it comes to the third implication, it's very important that our youth not only offer advice and information about our future, but also have the ability to propose legislation, to propose ideas to the very top, right, to our National Assembly. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. شكرا جزيلا دكتورة شريف.
Thank you, Dr. Shareefa.
Thank you, Dr. Shareefa. Even though I'm sad because I think there is a kind of violence against male. She has categorized us and classified us among the elderly and the youth. Dr. Shareefa, in her paper about the role of women in public policy making in the GCC, the case of Kuwait. She always placed the future with women and the youth. She did not give us a role to play. She gave us figures about the role of women, the youth in the GCC states, how women and the youth were able to promote decision making. She shed light on the case of Kuwait, provided suggested solutions that require a mechanism, and I think the same case in Kuwait also could be applied to other GCC states. We have approximately, where are the organizers? How much time do we have for Q&A? We have 10 to 15 minutes before you all get hungry and stop thinking because of hunger. Please state your name and be brief in your questions. And direct your questions to please precise speakers. Dr. Musa Al-Afri. Dr. Al-Afri. My question is to Dr. Malak Al-Rasheed. Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Al-Rasheed. My question is about the concept of civil society. Is it only limited to NGOs, or there are other parties that play a role, like political parties, syndicates, unions, associations, or there is this kind of confounding or actually mixture between NGOs and these associations? And what is the role of women organizations in Kuwait? I will give now the floor to Sudan. I want to listen from different countries. Hiba Farid. When we talk about the state, we talk about government and CSOs. CSOs include private sector, research centers, think tanks, political parties. When we talk about public policies, we talk about official and the role of officials and the role of other sectors. 65% of effective policies were issued by people who are closer to the grassroots, who are not part of the government. Please, quick question. It is a comment, not a question. In public policy making, we have 5 stages. The role of CSOs in the first stage, we say you have the agenda setting, and then in the formulation and drafting do not have a great role. Implementation do not have a great role. They play a primordial role in the evaluation. These are the 5 main stages. This is why, if we want to promote the role of the CSOs based on our experience in Sudan, CSOs have a great role. You have to train organizations to play 2 main roles. One moment, please. I want to give the floor or the micro here. Al-Hajri, Dr. Al-Hajri from Kuwait. I thank all the speakers for their papers. Dr. Malak, the problem in Kuwait is the definition of CSOs. NPOs, for example, are required by law not to work in politics. So before registering, they have to state that they will not work in politics. So how can you work if you are can work and really work effectively if you are not allowed to work in politics? So political parties in Kuwait are NPOs that are required not to work in politics. What is your question? My question is to Dr. Malak. What is the political role of these CSOs per se? Dr. Shareefa. أود أن أسأل عن الانتخابات. لم تحدثي مثلا عن الحراك في الكويت حركة الحراك التي كان الشباب طبعا وراءها. أين موقف المرأة من هذا الموضوع؟ فمعظم المشاركين في هذا الحراك هم من الشباب الرجال وليس من الإناث. أين إذن هو دور المرأة في هذا الحراك الذي شهدناه في الكويت؟ Sana Al-Farrouh from Kuwait. I would like to thank all the speakers for their valuable interventions. I'm Kuwaiti in spirit, even though I am wearing the Omani traditional thobe. I'm Kuwaiti. I felt deeply connected with the 3 papers, especially the paper Dr. Shareefa, but I felt that they have a negative perspective with regards to the status of women in Kuwait. My question, perhaps Dr. Abdul asked a similar question. The CSOs in Kuwait do not work in politics. Even legally, they are not allowed to work in politics. But in reality, all their seminars, all the decisions are politically centered. They represent the ideas of political parties in Kuwait. Dr. Malak, how do these CSOs work with the parliament in order to issue laws, to draft laws? I do not feel that there is a true cooperation. The parliament is the true policy makers, especially with regards to women-centered laws, and after having women as members of the parliament. So how can we promote the role of CSOs in drafting laws in Kuwait? My question is also similar to the question of Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Saadia. My question is to Dr. Ibrahim, even though the paper is the paper of Dr. Yacoub, but Dr. Ibrahim is a professor in political science, and he specialized in policy making, actually. The same problem, actually, that MPOs in Kuwait, or actually CSOs in Kuwait, are not allowed to work in politics. Not only in Kuwait, by the way, in all GCC countries, to the exception of Bahrain, that has political organizations. In one GCC countries, they had a parliamentary elections a month ago, and among the conditions of the candidates is not to speak politics. But since we are talking, since there is, we are moving towards, of course, the reconciliation, I will not state the name of the country. We know that Kuwait has a rich political history since 1962, but until now we do not have political parties in Kuwait and CSOs that work in politics in Kuwait. Why is that? Fahd al-Fadala. Dr. Ibrahim al-Habdan stated in his paper that we have a gap on the level of the culture of volunteering. In Kuwait, we have a vast culture of volunteering. We have syndicates, we have associations, we have organizations we have approximately 80 volunteer groups in addition to associations. We should not only repeat concepts and terms without actually looking into them. Sometimes researchers have different points of views. Allow me to interrupt you and give the microphone to your colleague behind you. Thank you, Rasheed Al-Bazi from Morocco. My question is to Dr. Ibrahim Al-Hadban. You've mentioned the independence of CSOs. This is very important because civil society organizations work on mobilizing citizens, not for political or electoral conflict, but what happens sometimes the state in the entire Arab world, some political parties, some governments. Please be brief in your question. Work on mobilizing these organizations for their own political interests. How does this apply to Kuwait? Dr. Al-Rasheed, you've concluded that CSOs failed in establishing a legal framework to mitigate violence against women in Kuwait. Quickly, please be brief in your question. The second role of the CSOs is raising awareness. To what extent can these CSOs raise awareness with regards to violence against women, and what is the role that they can play to mitigate and combat such form of violence? شريفة تتحدثين العربية؟ You can ask her in Spanish, English, and even Russian.
My question is the Assembly, the Kuwait Youth Assembly, the members are 36, right? And they are selected by the government. And they are not elected. Okay. And how many members? How many members? يعني صراحة, this is the first time I hear about this. I'm a Kuwaiti, huh? Or sociologist, or Kuwait University. So, thank you.
شكرا. خلي الميكروفون يدور معكم هنا حتى اوصل اليك انت. اختار ما مسك انت بتكون. اختار ما مسك بتكون انت. لان الميكروفون بسرعة. الوقت قاتل لنا.
Please be quick. We do not have time. Dr. Ibrahim, excellent paper. When shedding light on the challenges, I would have wished to see to shed light more on the cultural challenges. As CSOs, we want CSOs actually to promote more cultural activities. In the last elections, in the lawyers' union in Kuwait, we have seen really a kind of political polarization in these elections. Dr. Malak, it is a good paper, but I believe there is something that this paper did not talk about, how women look to their role, to themselves in Kuwait, because women really believe that they are powerless, that they are weak. And this is something that we have to change. Ahmed Ismaili from Sultanate of Oman. My question is to Dr. Shareefa. Dr. Al-Rasheed. We have two theories of violence. The religious theory that believes that hitting is a form of discipline, and the civil theory that believes that hitting, of course, is an uncivilized and violent manner. Could we find a common ground between both theories? Kuwait and then Egypt. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have 30 seconds. 30 seconds. It's only clarification, or rather a comment, with regards to the role of the civil society organizations, the culture. We do not have a culture of CSO in the Arab countries and in the GCC states. We have to say it truthfully and plainly. And I am writing a book on this matter that will be published soon. Dr. Malak talked about violence. We have a committee that is reviewing the laws related to violence against women and children. And we are working on establishing a help center that welcomes women who are subject to violence. Kindly use the microphone. Hamad Harbi, reporter, journalist, Egypt. We have to look on the cultural specificity between our culture and the culture in the West. A quick question to Dr. Malak. She was talking about shadow reports that are presented to the United Nations agencies along with the government report. Do you believe that it is possible that decision makers in international organizations will use these reports in order to intervene in the sovereignty of Islamic states per se? Microphone, please. Microphone. Question, please. What I mean, let us deal with this issue that we have to adapt legal and legislative framework to a place where CSOs can express themselves politically and culturally. Last question from Morocco. Perhaps we have a comparative studies to compare the indicator of trust between NGOs, non-government organizations, and governmental organizations, because I believe that the society trusts more non-NGOs, trust the non-government organizations more than the government organizations. I will start with Dr. Shareefa. Dr.
Thank you all
Shareefa.
for your questions. When we're talking about elections, elections began March 13th, or it was open for nominations, we'll say. People self-nominated. There were a few hundred that nominated themselves. A lot of this was done on Twitter and online. From there, from the names that follow the criteria, the ministry selected 36. They had letters of recommendation and videos. And you picked up on exactly what has been a bit of a difficulty with the Kuwait Youth Assembly, which is why it got dissolved. People were saying the process needs to be more transparent. So elections for the Kuwait Youth Assembly are happening right now, as we speak. I've tried to find the announcement, but much like yourself, it's in corners here and there. But the new elections will be coming up for the new Kuwait Youth Assembly. When it comes to any new institution, although we see it as something that's useful and good and encouraging, everything new goes through a little bit of difficulties in the beginning until they find their way. So I understand why it's hard to hear about it.
شكرا. Final? Finished?
لا كان
Okay.
يعني 10 دقايق خليك. I have a minute, right?
Yep, it's okay.
Okay. And so
you're
with
finished.
with Dr. Ajmi, I think we'll talk more about elections. I wasn't fully clear on your point, but you went into Iraq, I think, and I think we can talk about the committees and what they have to say regarding security, and my interviews on that. And then the last question, which was comparative for all of them, I think you just meant for the civil society organizations, because I am presenting a formal institution within the government, and so that is not a part of the civil society organization. So I just wanted to address you and thank you, but it's not for me. Thank you.
شكرا دكتورة شريف، أعطتك دقيقة على فكرة. دكتور إبراهيم.
بس يعني فيما يتعلق بقضية
With regards
حزب الأمة عندما أعلن بالكويت
the Ummah party in Kuwait, when
يعني إنشاء
it was registered,
بشرط أن يكون هناك قانون ينظم الأحزاب.
we have to have a law that organizes the work of political parties. The Ummah party was not condemned as a political party, but because it violated the assembly law. The registration, the issue of registration of political parties, I think this requires a law in Kuwait. Everything really takes time. Everything is deferred. Doctor, you talked about the issue of volunteerism and volunteering. I would like to remind you that this research paper is a research paper written by Dr. Yacoub Al-Kandari. He said that there is, for now, that we are still facing challenges because I think the concept of volunteering is still very ambiguous in Kuwait. And this is a paper, as I remind you, is a paper written by Dr. Yacoub Al-Kandari. The role of CSOs, I believe that these organizations are trying to lobby in order and are using the media to advocate, to lobby the decision makers, but they do not take part or partake in elections, even though sometimes they back certain candidates. With regards to tribal relations and social relations, unfortunately, this traditional really the belonging to the confession, to the sect, to the tribe sometimes is even stronger than the belonging to the state, to the nation. Dr. Malak. I've been asked at least 9 questions, but I think there is a lot of similarities. I will not answer each person by name, but I will answer in general. You've asked about the concept of CSO. Does it include political parties? In Kuwait, we might tell you, no, we do not have political parties, we do not have a law that allows the registration of political parties, but the status quo says that these CSOs are now in lieu of political parties. They are playing the role of political parties, even though they are registered in the state as per the Kuwaiti constitution. In order to be allowed to register as a CSO, you have to write an affidavit stating that this CSO will not be working in politics. If you want to establish a lobby group, and this was a priority of CSOs, to establish a lobby group in order to change policies, to advocate for new policies, and to speak on behalf of marginalized groups, you are working in politics, i.e. So there is a misconception that these CSOs do not work in politics. This is my own personal point of view. Most CSOs work in politics because this is their game, this is their playing field for them to play their role in order to advocate for new social policies. They have to work in politics, they have to lobby decision makers and policy makers. Even members of parliament are calling us as members of CSOs in order to partake in decision makers, in order to raise our voices, in order to change the policy agenda of the state. The second point with regards to the political role of CSOs, I've mentioned that. Dr. Saria talked about our presentations and the negative point of views and pessimistic view. No, they are not pessimistic. And also I will answer the failure that our colleague mentioned. I'm not saying a failure of efforts. I'm saying a failure in ratifying the law. Now, while we are speaking, there is a law that has been re-examined and reviewed and assessed by CSOs. There is a law, and we are waiting for its ratification. So I believe in the failure is the non-ratification of the law as of yet. With regards to the women's outlook of themselves, yes, this plays a very important role. It is very hard. This requires a philosophical study, and it requires another session. Mr. Ahmar says how we can draw boundaries between civil theory and religious theory. If women are subject to harm, even beating for discipline is mentioned in the law. So the difference between discipline and harm is also delineated in the law. With regards to the with regards to having a shelter for men, as of yet we do not have such a shelter in Kuwait. We have a shelter for domestic helpers only in Kuwait, but I have been working now in order to establish shelters for women who are subject to domestic violence or other forms of violence, and the shelter would be subject to the Ministry of Social Affairs, because sometimes people view shelters that are for orphans, for delinquents, etc. But this is why I wanted this shelter not to be part of the Council of Family Affairs, but actually rather to the Council of Ministers. The shelter is ready. It is fully furnished, but we are only waiting for the state to to make the shelter operational, fully operational. With regards to shadow reports, as mentioned, there was fear, like our colleague mentioned, that these shadow reports would be used by international organizations in order to interfere in the sovereignty of Islamic countries. There is communication between those who are writing shadow reports and the official government reports. These shadow reports will only are there to complement the official reports drafted by the state. Perhaps the shadow reports will only include certain efforts that are not mentioned in the official reports. As I said, these reports will not be used as a weapon against the sovereignty of the state, but rather to complement the reports issued by the state. This second session was entitled Civil Society and Public Policy Making in Kuwait. In your name, allow me on your behalf, on my behalf, to thank Dr. Ibrahim, Dr. Yacoub Al-Kandari, Dr. Ibrahim Al-Hadban, Dr. Malak Al-Rasheed, Dr. Shareefa, Abdullah Al-Adwani for their valuable interventions. We all say that Kuwait is the oldest democracy in the Gulf. And thank you for shedding light on the experience in Kuwait and for showing us that Kuwait is still suffering from the same problems that we are suffering in our GCC states, even though Kuwait is the oldest democracy. But Oman is the first GCC country to allow women to take part in the parliament. We hope that CSOs in GCC states will have a more constructive role, more effective role in policy and decision making.